So welcome to this evening's deliberative forum and expert panel on social media and how should we engage and regulate social media, if at all. My name is Graham Bullock, and I'm a professor of political science here at Davidson College and the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, or DCI for short. The DCI is happy to be co-hosting tonight's event with Davidson College's digital studies, political science, and psychology departments, and the J. Hurt Hub for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, where we are right now. We're also excited to be hosting our second hybrid forum with both in-person and virtual participation options. Just as a warning, there are always kind of hiccups with these hybrid options, so please bear with us and hopefully it goes smoothly. So welcome to everyone online and here at the Hub. Before we get started, we'd like to ask that you complete a short survey and consent form that I shared earlier. I'll bring it back for the in-person participants, and I'm going to put it in the chat right now for our online participants. If you click on that, should be a consent form and then a couple quick questions, and we'll do another one at the end. And this helps us with our research component of the DCI and helps us to improve the design of our events and in the future. Let's see. We also encourage you to switch to speaker view in Zoom as we'll be spotlighting the speakers, and it'll be easier to see who is talking in that view. Just go up to view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and select speaker view. So now that you can hopefully see me, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight for the DCI's first deliberative forum of 2023, following our events on parents and schools, free speech and inclusion, and economic mobility last year. And before we begin, I'd like just to share a little bit about the DCI, which you can learn more about on our website, deliberativecitizenship.org. Its purpose is to create opportunities for Davidson students, faculty, staff, alumni, and members of the wider community to productively engage with one another on difficult and important issues facing our community and society. So how to engage with and regulate social media is certainly one of these issues, as well-meaning and well-informed people can differ about the benefits and risks of this technology and what we should do about it, both at the micro level of its impacts on our personal lives and relationships and the macro level of its effects on our society, politics, and democracy. So to help us better understand and explore these diverse perspectives, we've paired a fantastic panel of experts with an opportunity for all of you to talk through these questions with one another in small groups. We have over a dozen trained DCI facilitators ready to facilitate these discussions and lead you through the deliberation guide that we shared with you previously and is available at this link in the chat, which I'm going to put in the chat right now. Hopefully I can do that relatively smoothly. Here you go. So as you know, tonight's event is free of charge. The only thing that we ask you to stay and join the small group discussions after the panel. These discussions are the primary purpose of our deliberative forums. The panel is designed to catalyze your conversations with your fellow citizens. They are a great opportunity for you to both express your own ideas and questions while listening to those of others in your group. So before we get started, I've asked 4 of our DCI fellows to introduce our expert panelists. First, Peyton Carter will introduce Emily Dreyfus.
Emily Dreyfus is a journalist who covers the impacts of technology on society with a focus on social media and information systems. She was the 2018 Neiman Berkman Klein Fellow, a senior editor at Wired and CNET, and a founding editor of tech news website Protocol. Ms. Dreyfus is currently senior editor and research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Technology and Social Change Project, where she co-leads the Harvard Shorenstein News Leaders Program and edits the Media Manipulation Casebook, a research platform that advances knowledge of misinformation and its threats to democracy, public health, and security. Ms. Dreyfus is also a co-author of the 2022 book, Meme Wars, the untold story of the online battles upending democracy in America.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peyton. And now is Peter here? Yeah, Peter is going to introduce Melissa Hunt.
Hello, everyone. Melissa Hunt is the Associate Director of Clinical Training in the Department of Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, where she has also earned her PhD in psychology. Dr. Hunt conducts ongoing research on the cognitive and affective bases of depression, anxiety, and chronic gastrointestinal disorders, and has published 2 books on these topics for both patients and clinicians. In 2018, Dr. Hunt published the first experimental study on Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram use, and found a causal link between time spent on these platforms and increased loneliness and depression. The study, No More FOMO, Limiting Social Media Decreases Loneliness and Depression, was published in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology and has been cited over 700 times.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And now Lagan Smith will introduce Darius Kazim.
Darius Kazemi is an internet artist and researcher who has been working on federated, decentralized social media since his Mozilla Open Web Fellowship in 2018. He maintains several federated social media software projects, including Hometown, and published Run Your Own Social, a guide to hosting a small social media site for your friends. He is a senior software engineer at Meetin, where he works on Check, a software tool for content moderators and fact checkers. He has been interviewed by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times about the difficulty of identifying bot accounts on social media, and the Boston Globe has described him as one of the most closely watched and pioneering figures at the intersection of technology, cultural commentary, and what feels to many like a new kind of web-native art.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lagan. And now, last but not least, Daniel Lee will introduce Jacob Michangama.
Jacob Michangama is CEO of the think tank Justitia, directs the organization's Future of Speech project, and was recently appointed as a research professor at Vanderbilt University. He has written and commented extensively on free speech, technology, and human rights in international media outlets, including The Economist, LA Times, Washington Post, BBC, CBS News, NPR, CNN, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, Politico, and Wall Street Journal, as well as top-tier academic and peer-reviewed journals. Jacob is the producer and narrator of the podcast Clear and Present Danger, A History of Free Speech, and author of the critically acclaimed book, Free Speech, A History from Socrates to Social Media, published by Basic Books in 2022.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Sample, who is chair and professor of digital studies here at Davidson College, and he will be the moderator of the panel portion of our evening together. And I'm going to change something for him right here, so he can see you guys on this screen pretty easily. So. The chat there. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, this is, like I told you.
We're gonna blur the background.
Yeah, so then it's like more cool. So, all right, there you go, Mark.
All right. Hello, everyone, online and off. So I'm going to say a few more words about just what we're here for and how the structure might be. But most of the time, we want to hear from the 4 people up there who are not me. So if you read the deliberation guide that goes along with the event, you can see 4 perspectives laid out about social media. And Graham kind of mentioned those. So on the kind of micro interpersonal level, there's the perspective that social media can connect us with one another and help strengthen interpersonal relationships and even form new communities. On the other hand, there's the perspective that social media actually leaves us feeling more alone, more isolated. We just have a whole bunch of people popped up.
Oh. It's something that caused some problems. Sorry.
But our views just changed, but that's okay. I'll just keep going. So the idea that social media can disconnect us from one another. And then we can look at things on a more macro level, a kind of social, societal level. And there's a perspective that social media is democratizing, turning everyday people into citizen journalists. It helps foster new social movements like Black Lives Matter. On the other hand, there's the perspective that social media is actually damaging democracy through misinformation and the amplification of hate speech and abusive behavior that targets the most vulnerable people in society. So these four perspectives, I think, represent the extremes of what are really spectrums. And I think none of these perspectives are actually mutually exclusive. And in fact, they can all be true at the same time. What I want to do, or what we all hope to do in the next hour or so, is to add some nuance to these perspectives, some historical context to these discussions, and some technological insights into what makes these platforms run, and are the things about the platforms that encourage or discourage certain kinds of behaviors. So roughly speaking, we'll spend about a third of the time talking on that micro interpersonal level and what social media does or doesn't do there. Then we'll spend a third of the time talking on a more societal level about social media. And then a third of the time is just going to be open discussion where we go wherever the discussion takes us. But before we get to the kind of that part, we're going to let each of the participants just kind of talk for 4 minutes about maybe their perspectives or their stake. They can be provocative if they want. You all can be provocative if you want. So whatever. We didn't decide who's going first. I'm going to pick Melissa just because she's first to my screen, and then Melissa can pick who goes next. This is what I do in my classrooms.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I think this is such an incredibly important topic, and I'm thrilled to be contributing here. So a little background on my work and my perspective on this. A number of years ago, I had an honors student, undergrad, really smart undergrad, come to me and say, hey, I'm really interested in like social networks and like friendship and stuff. And I really want to do a study on this. And I said, hey, you know what? Let's do a study on social media. Because at that point, there was a huge amount of correlational research, all cross-sectional, all at a single point in time, that suggested that using a lot of social media was associated with depression and anxiety and loneliness. But of course, we all know correlation doesn't equal causation. So it could be that more depressed or distressed or lonely people were spending more time on social media in an attempt to connect, right? So I said, all right, let's look at the literature. And we couldn't believe it that the study hadn't been done right yet. I said, this is not rocket science. Let's do the study right. Let's actually have people self-monitor for a week before we randomly assign them. Let's have it be out in the real world, not in the lab. Let's get objective data on how many minutes people are actually spending online. None of the other studies had done that. They had all relied on self-report. And often it was like, the amounts were ridiculous. It was like 10 to 20 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes, more than an hour. And like more than an hour was the biggest amount. So, anyone out there in the audience, young person, knows that's sort of absurd. So we did the study, and we looked to see what happened. We had people limit the amount of time they spent on social media, on Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram. TikTok didn't exist when we did this study, so that just gives you a sense of how quickly this field evolves. And the results were incredibly striking and clear. If people started out fairly distressed, if they had some depressive symptoms or they were lonely, limiting the time they spent on social media led directly to people feeling a lot better. And I remember having dinner at a friend's house the night I analyzed that data. And I just looked at my friends and I said, this is going to be big. Like this study matters. This is going to be big. And I didn't even anticipate correctly how important that study ended up being. I've replicated it now 3 separate times. I find very clearly every time that if you're distressed, limiting the time you spend on social media is going to help you feel better. And I want to be very clear that I'm not calling for abstinence. I think that's completely unrealistic. There is no abstinence program in the world that works very well. What we really want to be looking for is harm reduction here in the exact same way that we do with alcohol and drugs and young sex and all kinds of things. We want to teach people how to use these platforms wisely. And I do have some very clear advice about that, which I will just give you right now. Follow friends. That means people you actually know in real life and feel affection and respect for about 1 hour a day. And that's it. Unfortunately, of course, the social media platforms aren't designed to be used that way because they make money by having as many eyeballs as possible, following as much stranger content as possible, as frequently as possible, for as many hours a day as possible. So what we know about how to use social media wisely to actually improve your social connections is exactly what the social media companies don't want you doing. So that's a problem. So that's my spiel. And I'm going to have Emily go next.
Hi, y'all. Thank you, Melissa. So my background is totally different. I'm a journalist, and now I work at Harvard, kind of studying the media. So I feel like I'm a meta journalist. And my book, Meme Wars, is, I think, the most important thing to talk about when I only have 4 minutes, because it is a way of looking at the past decade and saying, what were the things that were happening in the very corners of the internet and corners of the social media spheres that allow kind of like intense extremism to exist? What was happening in those pockets that then leaked out into the mainstream and created actual things that affected all of us in our real world? So we started the book the day that the January 6th insurrection in 2021 happened, because the people that we were seeing storm the Capitol, aside from many of the government officials, a lot of the people were carrying flags and placards and signs that had internet memes on them. And many of those internet memes were fully, intensely deep down the rabbit hole inside political jokes about these very specific communities. And it was interesting because these were the people who people thought of as like, you know, severely, extremely online, only online, and they didn't exist in the real world. And here they were in the real world. And we wanted to say, this is why and how the affordances of the internet and the changes of the internet and our culture over the past decade have given voice to these kinds of movements and how these movements can grow up on social media. Which is not to say that social media only can foment violent movements or far-right movements. There are lots of movements that have been pro-social and pro-democracy that have come up online. But I'd say that I guess my position here, my like 4-minute position, is that we need to be aware of the fact that the internet and social media is a forum and crucible for our culture. And our culture is what then drives politics. There's a saying that actually comes from Andrew Breitbart, former living right-wing media mogul, former living. We're all future skeletons at some point. But Breitbart had a saying, which was very true, even though he and I have very different politics, which was that politics is downstream of culture. And what that means really, you know, is when we're talking about politics and when we're talking about our beliefs, we're talking about our ideals and culture wars, we're really having a cultural conversation, and it becomes policy, and it becomes, you know, part of the American political world after that. And the thing that I want everyone to understand now is that that is still true, but before we get culture, first we get infrastructure. We got cultural change when we got the television, which I have an old school tattoo of this old school TV right here. Like TV, radio, all of these things changed the way culture was created. And then that changed the way politics was created. And the internet and social media itself is also a new infrastructure, a new platform that we have to grapple with how that changes the way knowledge and belief is spread and shared. And we do need to recognize that there are systems, and that those systems can be revealed and understood in order to mitigate harms and to amplify benefits. And I have so much more to say about it, but I'm going to hand it over to Jacob next so that I don't take up too much time.
Thank you, Emily. I guess I would focus on how I've tried to look at many of the sort of controversies over free speech that erupt almost on a daily basis through a more historical perspective, because sometimes a more detached look on current events means that, you know, our biases and our sort of hot takes become less hot. And we sometimes can see patterns and see how history may not repeat itself, but rhyme. And one of the things that I find is that there's a tendency throughout history, really, of what I call elite panic. And that is the phenomenon where the public sphere is being expanded to groups that were previously not allowed into the public sphere. And you see this going back to the ancient Athenian democracy. But so every time a new group is given a voice in the public sphere, so whether it's women, religious, racial minorities, the poor and the propertyless, the institutional gatekeepers tend to think that it is catastrophic, that the social fabric of society cannot withstand the unwashed mob having a voice in public affairs, and therefore there needs to be sometimes pretty stringent measures to keep the unwashed mob out. Now, sometimes elite panic is based on genuine fears and concerns, and those are there in our digital age, as January 6th is a good example of. But what I have found is that very often the cure proposed is worse than the disease, in the sense that very often we say, well, if the problem is that social media amplifies a lot of extreme voices and people are allowed to spread unmediated mis and disinformation, the solution is more centralized control of speech. It could be government mandated content moderation, as with the Digital Services Act in the European Union. But the track record of trying to control speech with centralized measures is pretty poor. And there are some pretty scary examples, even in recent history. So, you know, the United States prides itself of its free speech exceptionalism, and how the First Amendment is almost a secular faith, a secular article of faith. But go back 100 years, and if you were the presidential candidate of the Socialist Party and you were against American involvement in World War I, you could go to prison for 10 years, and the Supreme Court would say that's fine. If you were a Jewish anti-war activist and you printed pamphlets that went against US policy, you'd go to jail. And if you go further back into, say, the 1830s, and you were an abolitionist that wanted to spread anti-slavery ideas into the South, you could formally be executed in a number of states. And unfortunately, what we see today is that some of the ideas, some of the laws that are being adopted in democracies, especially in Europe, is being copy-pasted by a number of authoritarian states who do so in bad faith, but it gives them what I call whataboutery points. Because if Germany adopts a law which says that social media platforms have to remove content within 24 hours, and Russia and Turkey does the same, and they do, they get, you know, it blurs the line between open democracies and authoritarian states. So what's the solution? there's no perfect solution, I'm sad to say, but I think one of the problems is that we've moved very far away from sort of the ideals of the internet in the 1990s, a much more decentralized, egalitarian space to a much more centralized, platformized space. And I think one of the sort of more Solomonic solutions is to move towards a more decentralized ecosystem of social media information, one that empowers users to have more control over what kind of content they want to be confronted with, rather than having private tech platforms and governments decide on that. That is a solution that comes with all kinds of dilemmas. It's dilemmas all the way down, but I believe it's a healthier way forward than the current status quo. And with that, maybe over to you, Darius. Yeah, well, there's only Darius.
There's only me.
Yeah. So
that was a great springboard for my spiel. So, looking over the deliberative guide, each of the 4 claims in the guide begins social media. It connects us, it harms us, it's good for democracy, it's bad for democracy. I'm kind of a terrible nerd about this sort of thing. And so my response is, okay, but social media is not homogenous and characteristics change between social media sites. And I agree that there is, and I know it when I see it, rule when it comes to social media, that you can kind of intuitively bucket Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and Instagram together on some level. But when people do that, what's interesting to me is what exactly is it that those things have in common that causes us to lump them together? Of course, there are a lot of surface level similarities, but after thinking through this for many years, my conclusion is that ultimately what ties them together is that they're corporations that are ad-supported, they're incentivized to make money from user attention, they rely on centralized cloud services and selling user data, and that's just a small sampling of the structural similarities in terms of how they're organized and designed. I'm an engineer, so I'm always thinking about building new things, and of course, my question is, well, what do the characteristics of social media without those material realities look like? Which I could rephrase as, how do we build social media with the characteristics that we would like to see in the world? This is what made me write my guide, Run Your Own Social, and caused me to begin investigating decentralized social media, which plays by a very different set of material and structural rules and political rules than the social media sites that we're familiar with. All of this to say, that's the direction that I'm coming from towards these questions. I'm really glad to be here, and thanks for having me. I'm happy to expand on any of that.
Great, thank you, everyone. It's so easy, I think, to kind of jump to the societal level. That seems to be where the what is that? The black hole, the gravitational center of gravity is for these discussions. But I want to stay kind of local and personal and interpersonal right now at the beginning. And I'm going to ask a question for all of you that is intended to help the folks who are online and in the audience here. And Darius, you already kind of mentioned this. We tend to think of, we use social media as this kind of homogenous term, but it means so many different things, and there's so many different layers and slices to social media. And I think we have to kind of separate those out. So my question, and not everyone has to answer this, anybody, you can jump around, you can just jump in, but like, from your perspective, what's the most important slice of social media to understand in order to wrestle with some of these questions? Yeah, Melissa.
So I'll jump in at the very sort of granular personal and interpersonal level. In terms of the populations that I work with, which is young adults and sort of late adolescents, it's really clear that it is the performative and pictorial platforms that are the most dangerous for people. So in particular, Instagram, and interestingly, more recently, TikTok. There's a lot of evidence, and Frances Haugen, the whistleblower from Meta, which controls both Facebook and Instagram, made very clear that the good folks at Meta know this, right? That particularly for girls and young women, these appearance-based platforms can be extremely damaging in terms of body image disordered, body image distress, disordered eating, TikTok has a new filter available now, the Beauty Glam filter, which seamlessly, you can even put your hand in front of your face, and instead of sort of having your eye appear in the middle of your hand, like it's absolutely seamless now. And it makes perfectly adorable, normal looking, 17-year-olds look like 27-year-old anorexic supermodels with enormous eyes. Very Eurocentric supermodels, by the way. So it doesn't matter if you're Asian or African-American or what you are, it's gonna narrow your nose, and it's gonna heighten your cheekbones, and it's gonna plump your lips a little bit, and it's gonna make your eyes really, really big. That is unbelievably damaging to the self-esteem of young women and girls. And the study that I'm doing this year, along with some new great honors students, is actually focused on creating a media literacy sort of intervention specifically for Instagram, to really get people thinking about how absolutely unrealistic many of the images are that are presented. And guess what? We found exactly what we always find, except this time we're looking at restrictive eating and body image disturbance. And we found that the young women who start the study, and there are a lot of them who are over the sort of clinical cutoffs for, distress on these measures. Getting off Instagram is the most helpful, but our media literacy intervention is actually pretty helpful as well. So I would say that the most important slice from my perspective is these image-based apps that are creating these utterly, monstrously unrealistic, unattainable, and frankly, really quite disturbing images of what beauty is supposed to look like. And it's really messing up our young women.
I'd like to piggyback off of that and just say that when we talk about individual features like the beauty filter you're talking about, again, my brain always goes to, okay, well, why did TikTok include that? And the reason I believe is that it's something grabby and engaging, and it keeps people using their software, and they need people to keep using their software so they can keep selling ads against the software and stay in business. What I like to talk about features in terms of, so for those who aren't familiar with the kinds of social media that I try to advocate for, it's really more like small clusters of communities of people who actually know each other and are in community with one another. And then you can also talk to people in other communities. So it's not like on the old web where you'd be on one website or forum and you couldn't talk to people on other websites and forums. It's more like all these websites and forums can talk to each other, but you have kind of a home base with your own ideas about how the internet should be and norms and that sort of thing. And so as a concrete example, the software that I use to maintain my community, it got a new potential feature, which was trending topics, right? Trending topics is a normal thing on social media sites. And it's not the same as a beauty filter, but it's a feature, and it's a feature that's meant to engage people and keep them scrolling on their feeds. And so I just asked my community members, do you want this feature? And they said, nope. And I said, great, I didn't turn it on. We don't have trending topics in our community on our social network site. And I think that the material difference here is that the users who are my community members actually have a say, because I actually listen to them because we're all in community together. No matter how much noise you make towards Meta, they're highly unlikely to change some feature unless it's bad for their bottom line. Whereas my site doesn't have a bottom line. Everyone just pays a couple of bucks a month to help with the web hosting costs, and that's it. So as long as it stays useful to people and it doesn't make them depressed, then they'll keep paying that $1 or $2 a month, and we'll all have a good time together. And so that's sort of the more, again, it's kind of like where I go with like thinking about the incentives for these various awful features and where they come from?
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think it's a hard question if you're asking platform wise, because there's change happening all the time. And just new things emerge, like people are embracing Mastodon now, and Twitter is a totally different place than it once was a year ago, it feels like. But I think that for me, the most important thing to understand is that social media itself has eras. So the first era of social media was really kind of connecting you to your friends. Like, if we think about Facebook was first like a closed platform that was you connected to your other people at your college. And then it opened up and you added your grandma and your aunt, and then others. And then we ended up kind of the exact opposite of that was Twitter, where you can talk to celebrities and they might tweet back to you, like you can follow them. And if you say something funny enough and get their attention, they're going to talk to you. And these are people you don't actually know. And we then entered a different time, which is the one that maybe we're in still, or maybe is coming to an end. And I think we're entering an even third phase. But after that first social media 1.0, there was social broadcast. And that's what Twitter brought about, this phase of like, okay, wait, actually, we are all journalists. Like all of us could see a plane crash, take a video of it, live stream it, put it on Twitter. And now we're on ABC News. We're setting the conversation. We are holding, the powerful to account. Like we are witnessing history and publishing it here. And then that kind of morphed into TikTok, which is, as I got to say, I enjoy looking at TikTok. I love it. I'm a painter. I learn a lot from watching artists paint on TikTok. But you have to think about it. TikTok is such a fundamentally different product than Facebook. It is people who you do not know. You're not even choosing to follow them. You give it up to God. And in this case, God is the algorithm. You just say go with it. Know me, know thyself algorithm, and it will show you what you want. And it will take cues from you without you having to make any kind of choices. And it really is saying to you, you don't have to follow anyone you know, and you don't even have to be on there by your own name. Anonymity is baked in. It's fine. It's maybe even irrelevant in ways that it was a kind of debatable, controversial topic when we're talking about Facebook. And that is because it's a broadcast medium. People are getting famous on there. They're broadcasting on there. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, but that's what it is. It's competing with TV. It's competing with broadcast news, with broadcast entertainment networks. And then I think the era that we're in now, as the US government is considering banning TikTok because of its association with the Chinese government. And then also the Elon Musk takeover of Twitter and the kind of mass freak out of elites, Jacob, what did you call it? The elite panic, where a lot of journalists in particular on Twitter are very, very concerned that Twitter under Elon Musk's corporate ownership will become a place that is vested in far right ideas or in extreme capitalist ideas. So what we're seeing now, I think, is actually it remains to be seen. I actually would really like to hear from Darius whether you think Mastodon may be the kind of model that we're going to go toward, but whether or not it's Mastodon or whatever it is, what we're seeing is a lot of smaller sites come up where people can meet based on topic, based on interest, based on ideology. And we're also seeing people go back to kind of old school blogging, where that broadcast aspect of social media that had all been flattened and conflated with hanging out with your talking to your grandma and getting your news and signing up for your neighborhood charity drive and seeing videos of your friends, which were all happening in your Facebook feed, are kind of separating out to Substacks, websites, Mastodons, Truth Social, this and that. And I think that we're now entering a third phase. And so one thing that's important for this conversation for us to talk about is to just recognize social media is not brand new anymore. social media has actually gone through a bunch of evolutions and is in a new place.
Great. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit and kind of maybe open it up to also talking about that the kind of societal level as well. And so this is a question, I get, maybe it gets to the heart of the matter, or maybe it just confuses things more. But the essence of the question is like, who is responsible for one's social media use and consumption? So Melissa, you're making a kind of intervention kind of guide that maybe puts the on the users. Darius, you like, I'm going to build my own social network. Like there's, TikTok is, possibly being discussion being banned by the government. Like whose responsibility is it to kind of make social media we'll leave the corporations out of it and just imagine that they aren't only concerned about the bottom line. Like whose responsibility is it to make kind of sensible and even ethical use of social media?
I want to be the first one to tackle that again at the sort of micro level, because I get asked this by parents all the time. I get asked to speak at high schools and all kinds of things. And one of the things I want to be really clear is with this little intervention we're doing, that's with college students, right? With younger kids especially, putting the onus on children to manage the addicting qualities of these platforms is completely unrealistic and inappropriate. So for example, I feel extremely strongly that phones should be banned from schools. Children should not be allowed to have their phones with them during the school day. Expecting the kid to focus on their, calculus class or their history lesson or their bio lab, when they would much rather be streaming Netflix or checking Instagram or whatever. And the kids are doing that all the time. Teachers are wasting massive amounts of time just trying to get kids off their phones. So I think parents and schools and coaches and choir leaders and, all, church youth groups and bar and bat mitzvah classes and, all of those things, it is up to the adults in our children's lives to draw those hard lines in the sand. Kids should not be allowed to have their phones in their bedrooms at night, period. Leave the phone in the kitchen. The phone charges in the kitchen overnight. Get a cheap old alarm clock from CVS for your bedroom and use that to wake you up. So I really do want to make clear, Graham, in response to your question, that I do not think the onus should be on the individual, especially when we're talking about adolescents. So that's that.
Great, thanks. Jacob, I wonder if you had thoughts about this question.
Yeah, no, I think it depends a lot on what aspect. I'm a strong believer that when it comes to speech, especially for adults. I have an 11-year-old daughter who's we've had to sort of intervene to get her off her phone. So I think you obviously treat adults and children very differently. But when it comes to speech, I think it has been a good thing that the U.S. has had Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. I think which generally means that the platforms are not liable for user generated content. But then there are other aspects. Then there's privacy. Then there's antitrust. So I don't think you can just say who should be responsible for what, and I think it depends on what kind of aspect you're looking at when it comes to social media. But when it comes specifically to speech, I think it's an incredibly dangerous idea to expect platforms that have millions or billions of users to be accountable for speech. It sort of defeats the entire purpose of what they're supposed to do. And that's also, we just did we have sort of a report where we have looked at the terms of service and the community guidelines of 8 platforms when it comes to hate speech, and you see a huge scope creep in how they define hate speech and sort of protected characteristics and so on in a very untransparent manner. Then when you combine that with increased use of automated content moderation, you will see that, that actually a lot of the speech that these policies are supposed to safeguard, or groups that they're supposed to safeguard, are being affected, which is inevitable, right? There's no perfect way to do content moderation at scale. So when it comes to speech, I'm very skeptical about that, and I think that we just have to a large extent, we you know, the analogy is like if there's something horribly written in a you know, in a pamphlet or a print, we don't go to the market square and burn it and try to delete you know, what was written in it. If it's sufficiently serious, we try to punish the person who was responsible for it. That obviously comes with challenges in the age of social media. But one of the things that we try to work on is to develop these toolkits that will, so looking at how can counter speech, for instance, how can that help offset some of the harmful effects of hate speech? How can that empower minorities, for instance, who are inclined to self-censor on social media because they feel threatened or harassed by various groups? How can we make people better? You know, how can sort of pre-bunking misinformation, disinformation, and actually, I'm a bit hopeful. You know, my daughter, who's is very happy about social media. Sometimes she'll make these claims which are not entirely true, and my son, who's 13, will say, "Well, that's just a TikTok fact," and that suggests to me that, you know, younger generations who were immersed and thrown into this might. There's actually hope that they will develop a more skeptical mindset than those of us who were just thrust into it. The same way that, you know, if you were living in 1517 and you read the pamphlets of Martin Luther, they must have been extremely compelling, and you would react to them in a completely different way than if you and I picked up the writings of Martin Luther today, just because print technology has changed so much, and our mental modes have also changed. So those are some of the ways that I think about trying to create a better ecosystem that does not entail onerous intermediary liability for user-generated speech.
Yeah, building off what Jacob said, I wanted to just point out a term that I found very useful. I picked it up from my colleague, Kat Lowe, who studies content moderation at the nonprofit Medan, where I work. And she introduced me to the concept, the global governance problem, which is essentially the idea that you can't come up with a set of rules that 1 billion people are going to be happy with on any level. I mean, my city council can't come up with a set of rules that, you know, 1 million people are happy with. So this is, I like to think about that global governance problem and ways to allow people to self-govern as communities based on norms and values. Like the reason we are a community is because we share certain values with one another, and that can be an organizing principle around these sorts of things. But it requires it. I believe what Jacob said was you can't content moderate at scale, right? I don't think this can happen at scale. I don't think you can get millions of people with the same values together at scale, and I think there's ways, certainly online, there's ways to make these things a little more fluid and a little bit more community governed in ways that are difficult in real life for various reasons, like we all have to live on land, for example.
I just want to piggyback on that and just say scale, I think, is also just a crucial word when we're talking about harms and benefits of social media. Like, the main thing social media did for us in some ways was connect everyone to everything and to have it feel like any information is available at our fingertips. The power and danger of social media is the way in which it can scale an idea from being one person. They're no longer, when we think about speech, it's like one person standing on a street corner yelling about something, and they may amass a crowd around them, but like there are limits in space and time of how many people will be gathered around them. And the way that our systems used to work is that for that person to then become Alex Jones, let's say, since that is how he began, was often by yelling into his loudspeaker on the street, was that he'd have to get a television station. And like people put him on community TV, and then he got followers and he got watchers. Social media made all of that go away. You can just go viral in an instant, stand on the street corner, and instantly millions of people can see you. So I think when we're thinking about policies about like how to change that or how to think about that, like we should think of ways in which it's not about saying you can't do this, or you can't say that, or this cannot be there, but rather how can we build the places that we want to be on the internet that have the the format that creates content that we want, or that doesn't, like if what we think is dangerous is the potential for anything to instantly scale, and that can then cause, like we talk sometimes about misinformation at scale. Like people get things wrong all the time, and misinformation is not even intentionally malicious. People are just, it's hard to be right all the time. People say things that are wrong. What is dangerous about misinformation plus social media plus breaking news is that bad or malformed or erroneous idea can instantly become viral, hit millions and millions of people, and there's no chance. It's a snowball that is just headed toward our culture. So like one of the changes that we could do, one of the things we could do instead of if we're thinking about policy, forget trying to debate and re-argue about Section 230. Like actually, let's talk about breaking up the big platforms. You could talk about how could you have some really big change? You could disincentivize Facebook from gobbling up every single new competitor that comes along and then making it adhere to its rules. You could say, I want to be a part of a website where like I want a part of a social media team where you never have more than 100 followers, where like scale. And in some ways there's a phrase I like. It's called descaling, which when people say it, I imagine you're taking scales out of a fish, but that's not what we mean. We mean just like making things less massive and making things less flattened and less intensely global and national, and back toward a smaller, more community-based model, where then like people will still be wrong on the internet, like they always have been. Even before the internet existed, they were just wrong elsewhere, wrong at their dinner table, wrong in real life. But the danger may be mitigated because there won't be 5 places where all the attention is at all times. It's also driving mass media and everything else. So like antitrust is one way to do it. And also just, as Darius is saying, like norms. And I also think that the youth are the future. My son too, Jacob, he's 7. I am not worried about his generation. They are, I mean, maybe I should be, and I want to do the right thing.
I think Jacob's and Emily's kids are not necessarily generalizable to the population of this country, much less the population of the world. Your kids may be special.
Well, I mean, we may be, but I think they're special, but I'm also biased.
Well, let me jump in here.
Graham, can I take one second? I want to push back on Jacob with something. So Jacob, you gave the example of somebody with a pamphlet, right, that has information in it that you don't like. And you don't necessarily want to go into the town square and burn the pamphlet, right? I understand, I agree completely. But to take off from what Emily was saying, but what the social media platform algorithms are doing is they're taking those pamphlets, they're making 100 million copies of them, they're airdropping them all over the country, and they're forcing them under people's doors, right? And so the social media companies are very intentionally, or maybe completely accidentally, dramatically amplifying the most extreme and most damaging messages. So if both at the political level and also at the personal level. So if a young woman looks up like a new workout program, Within 3 clicks on Instagram, she's in a Fitspiration. They finally banned Thinspiration, which became a pro-anorexia group. You know, she's now getting all her feed is now giving her Fitspiration stuff showing anorexically thin women working out. That's a problem. And I don't know that we have to ban the content, but we have to figure out a way to stop amplifying it in the same way. So I'd love to hear what Jacob's thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I think I probably would distinguish a little bit between first of all, between adults and children. But for instance, when it comes to what you're talking about here is not sort of the classical lament about mis and disinformation. And here, I think it's quite instrumental to look at the narrative after the 2016 presidential election in this country, where the narrative was Russian misinformation decided it. And when you look at the research that's come out, that's pretty debunked, and it shows that the share of mis and disinformation is quite low, and it's a relatively small and very partisan group of people who share it. We've done studies where we've scraped Facebook comments, and we see that hate speech is actually an incredibly small amount of the content. So that goes up to of course, in absolute numbers, you know, you get into hundreds of thousands and millions if you look at a global level. But that's just to say that the picture is more nuanced. So that's the sort of the type of content that is more sort of political rather than what you seem to be talking about more, which is sort of these things, for instance, targeted at children, for instance, that in order to that might have. I'm
talking about children, though. I mean, I'm talking about you know, young adults and adults. I mean, so sure, I'm picking on the sort of, you know, body image stuff, but I think it's true about everything. Yeah. I see a humongous amount of misinformation in my real line of work, which is behavioral health psychology. I spend a lot of time on Reddit, on subreddits for people with chronic gastrointestinal disorders. The degree to which dangerous misinformation gets amplified on those platforms is absolutely horrifying.
Right. We're gonna try and wrap it up. So I would love to keep going with this discussion though, because you start mentioning GI stuff, and I'm like, let's dive into it. Now, I do also want to put a plug in because Emily, you mentioned Scale, and Darius mentioned Scale. So there's a social network called minus.social made by a net artist, Ben Grosser. You get 100 posts for life. So he's like building into the social network the idea that it's going to like die after 100 posts. But what I want to do really briefly, I'm going to give each of you like 15 seconds. Say, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of social media?
I'm pathologically optimistic.
Great. Okay.
I'm a therapist. I have to be optimistic. I'm optimistic because I think every new technology, there's a lot of growing pains. And I hope that we'll figure this out.
Darius?
I'm quite optimistic. I'm more optimistic than I've been in years. I think more people than ever are trying out alternatives to how things work. So that's a great thing for me.
Yeah, Jacob?
Yeah, I'm actually also optimistic. I think that innovation will go a long way. I think that free speech and access to information has some corrective mechanisms that allow us to as we're doing right now, as Melissa is doing, she's contributing to sort of pointing out systematic flaws, and we can do something about it through those mechanisms. And so we'll never get to a perfect equilibrium because we don't agree about what that is. But I think we'll get to a better place than the current status quo.
Excellent, thank you. So I think Graham's going to step up to tell us what happens next. But thank you so much, all four of you, for your insights and provocations and kind of generosity as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. It's fantastic discussion, and it lays a great foundation for the discussions of the rest of our friends online and in person. And so